So now we've got all these people who lived with her and walked this path with her. Mm-hmm. And the scary thing to me is, what next? Mm-hmm. So what for the next generation? Talk about a huge burden on our shoulders.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Hey, I'm Shane, and this is Classical Etc. Thanks for joining. If you want to support the program, feel free to like and subscribe. Today, I got a chance to sit down with Tanya Charlton, the curriculum director at Memoria Press, and we spent time remembering Cheryl Lowe, an amazing lady, the founder of Memoria Press and Highlands Latin School, and we talked about her crystal clear vision in establishing a curriculum, her perseverance in creating a school that's now thriving and branched out to campuses all across the country, as well as carrying on her legacy for future generations. This will be super inspiring if you're trying to educate in your home or in a classroom, anywhere, and you'll enjoy this conversation. Let's jump in. Tanya, have I ever told you fascinate me?
No, you haven't.
Yeah, you fascinate me.
I think I feel like a lot of people feel like that, like they're afraid.
I have a very specific reason, though.
Okay, because it took me years to realize that people found me intimidating.
No.
And I don't know why, but I recognize
This might play into it. Okay, so this is why I'm fascinated with you. Okay. You obviously have a lot in your own right. You're a pastor's wife. You're a business leader, a mother, all these things which are very meaningful in their own right and not in relation necessarily to anyone else. And yet, if I was at a dinner party with Bryce or something and Tanya Charlton came up, probably someone would mention, that you had worked as an editor for one of the most, famous novelists in America for a short time. And then he had entrusted you with his words on some level. And then B, someone would probably mention that your basic job and your legacy is to carry on the vision, and you've kind of lived, in some ways you live as kind of a trust for these people. And I've always found that really interesting, that's your life. And so for our conversation today, we talked about this. I think there are a lot of people who are trying to do classical education right now, 30 years after it's become a thing in the United States. And they're looking for help because in their area, there's no one else doing it. And so they look to Memoria Press, and we find that 30 years ago, Mrs. Lowe started all this. That's where she was. And she didn't just build a 2-day-a-week Latin class. She kept pushing. So now there are other people in that situation. So I just wanted to pick your brain as kind of the legacy carrier of Mrs. Lowe about what you think those people need to know about her that could inspire them to keep going forward. So tell me a little bit about kind of your experience doing that, and then maybe we can jump back to what you think were the factors that formed who she was to create that vision back when no one else had that vision.
Well, first, let me respond by saying that Wendell Berry did not entrust his words to me. He hired me to type his manuscript. I made the choice to be a critic of his work and to say, I'm not just going to type for you, but I'm going to tell you what I think about what you've written. And that's been a long and prosperous relationship between us. He is such a dear friend. But sometimes he probably wished that I had fewer words about his words. And as far as the carrying on the legacy of Cheryl Lowe, that is terrifying to me and has been for years now, 3 years now. We're going into the 4th year, I guess. And it is there is nobody that I know of that is as brilliant as she was. Lee and I talk about this a lot, about this burden of carrying on her legacy and making sure that what she wanted continues to happen, and what she so thoroughly 100% believed in continues. And it's really amazing to me because I feel like I worked with her for 16 years before she died. And first of all, in the capacity of she was the teacher of my children. And then later as a teacher and then finally as a partner here at Memoria Press. But she never faltered in any of everything's the same, was the same.
What do you think in those early days? She was teaching chemistry, right?
Yes.
When she first started, what do you think it was about her that first led her to these ideas, but then kind of helped her to create not just kind of, I have certain ideas about the great books that I really resonate with, which is a lot of people, but more so, this is an educational program that she kind of started to create in her mind.
Well, it started practically because she had her middle school children in a really expensive school here, and she decided they weren't being educated, which is how she said it. I decided they weren't being educated. So I took them out, but she first wanted to figure out if they weren't being educated in this really good private school, what was missing? What is education? And being a researcher, which she was, and a reader, she researched education and finally came to the conclusion that there was only one true education, and that was the classical education. And once she came to that conclusion, that was it for her. That was, to me, that was a pivotal moment in her life. So she started teaching herself Latin, taught her children Latin, and then decided everybody needs to be classically educated. So then she started fighting education reform here locally. At the same time, she started this little homeschool in her home to teach students Latin. And her goal, I think she was shocked at what happened, that her little living room school became what it is.
Yeah.
But she also her goal was that every student would have a classical education. And until that was done, she wasn't finished.
Yeah. So you think that, she was shocked, but at the same time, there was something about her that was drawing those people in, because I know a lot of people who love the idea of a Latin-based education, but can't sell it to their friends and neighbors. Right. Was it like a personal magnetism, or was it the conviction with that idea that drew those people initially? I mean, you sat in some of those meetings, right?
That was how I found her. Actually, Wendell Berry's wife found her and told their daughter, because we were good friends and we were looking for an alternative for our children. Mm-hmm. And she said, you need to go hear this woman speak. And so Mary and I went to this church basement. I don't even remember the church here in Louisville. And we listened to her. And I found the other day in her papers, this little thing, that was her handout. Yeah. Which it's still in her papers. I've got so much stuff, piled up at my desk that she wrote. But this was her vision, was the difference between a classical education and a job training.
So for our listeners, describe this piece of paper, kind of how it's laid out. And I think as you describe it, they'll kind of hear Memoria Press's vision. So just describe how it's laid out.
Okay. So on the left, it says education, broad and general, not useful or practical for anything in particular, but everything in general. And then she's got, I don't know what these little houses are she's drawn, but the first one says basic skills, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Plus, there's a bigger house, liberal arts education for virtue citizenship. And then under that, she's listed religious studies, Latin grammar, classical literature, mathematics, and general knowledge.
This is totally just an articulation of the entire vision of what we do now.
It is.
But like 30 years ago.
I know. Yeah. And it's still the same, but she just stood there. And if you knew her, she didn't come across as charismatic. Yeah. She was a petite woman. She was quiet. She wasn't a charismatic speaker at all, but she was so 100% a believer in what she was saying, the words coming out of her mouth. She spoke with so much authority that you just believed her. Yeah. And I did. I knew nothing about classical education, but I still remember her standing up there and saying this job training.
Yeah, so the other side of the piece of paper.
The other side of the piece of paper, which is narrow and specific, useful and practical. But I remember her saying, if you give your students this education on the left, this classical education, then whatever they choose to do in their job training, they will be able to perform with justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation. Because you've trained them basically to be citizens, to be ethical, whole people. And so it doesn't matter then when they can then do anything, but their person is whole. Yeah. And I just totally then enrolled my oldest child in her little class and drove an hour one way to come let him sit at her feet.
Sure.
And it just, our relationship went from them. But that was it never changed for her. That vision never changed. It's really remarkable.
That is remarkable.
The curriculum really didn't change. The curriculum she handed me for the first 5th grade class she ever had, we're still using. Yeah. She was just a brilliant woman and just really knew how to figure things out.
It's a word to people out there trying to achieve some kind of form of education that the temptation immediately is, whether it's with your own children or trying to start a school, is to try and find the lowest common denominator and appeal to everyone. And that's not at all what she did.
No. No, she was to be such a soft-spoken person. And so she was very level. Her personality was very level. But she was adamant about what she believed and that this was the only education for students. And her goal was that she would provide it. And so with the school, it just kept growing. Yeah. But then she wanted to give it to everybody else across the world.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to point out, is that it's kind of remarkable that it didn't just end with a 2-day Latin class. She kept on pushing.
Right.
So there's 2 aspects of that. One, as you were just saying, she wanted to give this to everyone. What do you think what caused her to have that drive to keep going past her family and not just have a nice retirement, and instead work until the end?
She never even drew a salary. This was for her all about the vision because she so wanted it for every student. I look when I go down the hall in the cafeteria to go to the cafeteria. There's that picture of her sitting at a little student desk.
Yeah.
And I know at that point, I've seen her sit at that little desk just at Crescent Hill in a classroom with students coming in, reciting Horatius at the Bridge for her. It all just was so personal for her that to give students this gift of education. Yeah. And it never, because it was so personal to her, it had to become personal to her teachers.
Yeah.
And we had to, because we sat at her feet too. And we had to treat our jobs with the same kind of commitment and passion toward classical education that she had.
And you think it was personal to her in the sense that she just cared so much for the children, or, kind of living the good life? Like, what aspects of that do you think?
I think caring for the children, definitely. Yeah. She loved the students, but also for her, I think it was, this is how we're going to save our society. Yeah. Is we have a responsibility to bring children up so that they are capable of being good citizens and of being able to run things.
Right. So the other side of it is that she did push and all these things were built. The other side of that is that this is a lady who's passionate about education and a school, and then all these other things start happening. And people who love her ideas are doing things under her guidance and name. How did you see her respond to those things and not allow anything to get away from her, but at the same time lead and adapt where it was appropriate? How did you see her manage those situations?
Well, she just continued being who she was and doing what she did. She would sit at her desk all day long and work, and there would be chaos around her. You know what kind of chaos we had. And everybody was in one room in the office working, phones ringing off the wall, conversations, and I am loud. I'm a loud manager, so I'm screaming across the room at other people, and she never swerved from whatever she was working on, if it was a Latin program or a phonics program. And then all of a sudden, at some point, something would catch her ear, and she would look up and say, What are you talking about? Totally missed like the past 2 hours.
Sure.
So she was so dedicated to it, but that required people like Brian, her son, to come in and manage the business end of it, because she knew that she needed a business end, but she really had no interest in it. Her goal was she was on a path with blinders on to give this education to students and to equip teachers to be able to teach it and parents to be able to do it, that it was doable for everybody. But all the business end of it, she just didn't care about.
Yeah.
But she needed it to happen.
Sure.
And she did recognize that, and she was thankful for it when she got ready to give the curriculum to homeschoolers. She came to me and said, will you come manage Memoria Press, because we need to package this curriculum so that other students can have it.
Sure.
Because and I want it to be affordable. I want everybody to be able to do it. And so, she would have given it away if she could have given it away, and we could have all worked for free.
Yeah.
If she could have had a bunch of people working for free, she would have given it away. She wanted it that badly.
Can you think of any, funny stories or good stories from that time period when, after she kind of knew the business side needs to take precedence, but she obviously has all these high ideas?
Brian had to come in and start managing it as a business.
Yeah.
For her, it was just, she was getting done in the classroom what she wanted to get done. And that was it. That was what she cared about.
Yeah. It reminds me of conversations I have with people who are trying to start these schools. And I'm trying to constantly tell them, really, these ideas transcend kind of the practical needs and necessities. Those things you got to take care of them. And, you're going to have to put some thought into them. But if you stick to these ideals, people will gravitate to you who have the ability to take care of those issues. And I feel like we've seen that happen here. People have just gravitated who have skills in different areas. And
that's right. Lee calls it providence. She says everything that's happened has been providence. Yeah. And Cheryl was at the core of that with the vision. Yeah. And everybody else was scurrying around her while she sat in a chair and read Cicero or worked on classical phonics or a spelling program. And even, up until the time, like the day that she died in the hospital, she was still working. She was still giving people ideas of what she needed to happen. Wow. She never quit.
Yeah. So then that helps to transition to kind of something I wanted to ask you about going forward. Mrs. Lowe passed away, and we honor her memory with everything we do here at Memoria Press. And those of us who come who didn't have a relationship with her like you did are still trying to uphold her values, but we're also trying to take ownership of ideas that transcend any one person. And what has that been like for you, trying to strike that balance? And have you seen these ideas succeeding with other people who didn't know her? And what has that been like?
Well, I think when you gave me this outline about the kind of things that you wanted to talk about, you've got on here some beautiful things about her, and you didn't even know her.
Right.
But you say her focus on education above everything else, her stick-to-itiveness, her humility to let Brian and Martin run things, her strength in not letting things get away from her. All of that, it appears that you really knew her. And I think that is the key, is that she really, her mission, her vision, she was really able to articulate that and is still articulating it through how did you know these things about her?
Yeah, I knew them because I know you, and I know Brian, and I know Martin, and I know HLS, and Dr. Dickey, and Mrs. Booker, and all of them in some way embody a little bit of her. And that's how I've kind of pulled all these different things, and when I'm talking to them, they say, yeah, when I was talking to Mrs. Lowe, she said this, and that always kind of stuck with me. And that composite picture of her is Memoria Press and Highlands Latin School. But then it also transcends that, because each of these people are doing a job that everyone needs to do. And it's a universal, she embodied certain universal virtues. I think, she walked like Christ walked on this earth. And I think that's what I've seen.
Right. But I think that speaks, when I looked at this, I thought, we're doing it. You know who she was. And so we're right now doing it. We're able to continue on her legacy. I'm really scared about, Martin and I are going to die one day. And it's going to be up to people like you.
That is scary.
It is scary because that's another whole thing. So now we've got all these people who lived with her and walked this path with her. Mm-hmm. And the scary thing to me is what next?
Mhm.
So what for the next generation? Talk about a huge burden on our shoulders
Mhm.
is how do we, I am so grieved that we don't have more video of her talking, that we don't have, but we didn't know. I mean, who knew that you don't think that your life's going to be cut short when you're 71 years old.
Right.
You just think you've still got plenty of time. And we didn't have a lot of video back then either.
Yeah.
That was good. So I'm very regretful of that because I think that would have been a way that people could still see who she was.
But the ideas, are still here, and that's what we're still, passionate about. And what areas of carrying on her legacy are you excited about right now? What things are you investing in that are still life-giving for you?
Well, we're doing the best we can with second form Greek was on our mind, traditional spelling was on our mind. So we're trying to continue to do those things. But what's most exciting for me is these huge drawers I have. I cleaned out her desk. I cleaned out her papers. I put them all in boxes. There is so much there. And that project of art, organizing all of that, much of it is on Post-it notes or in spiral bound notebooks, handwritten, so much that's handwritten, different versions of things. It's a huge job. But that is the most exciting thing is when I look at those and I look at her library of books because she always marked her books. All of that is for me, the future of her living on is if we could just get all of that organized, and that's the huge goal.
Yeah. So for homeschool educators or teachers or whoever who is in a position maybe more similar to where she was 30 years ago than we are now, kind of being here trying to continue something, whereas they're trying to build something, could you boil down maybe one or two characteristics from this conversation or from your observations about our life that they ought to embody so that they could be successful in classical education?
Well, I mean, the first thing would be to really understand what a classical education is and why we're doing it. And hopefully, once you understand that, you will have some of her passion because that's what it takes is the passion. It's not an easy education, as we know. It is very rigorous. But I personally have seen that my children's lives have been transformed by it. And I do see that they, regardless of what they've chosen to do with their lives, that they are truly educated. And the people now, we're hiring HLS graduates now.
Right.
And the fact that they're classically educated just gives them they can be of such help to us. And so I really believed in that church basement. I believed everything she said, and I changed my life. At that point, I changed my life to follow her in her vision. And I think that's what, if you can do that, if you can find that meaning, I believed it all the way through. But then I really knew it when my kids went to college because at that point, I started really seeing the benefit of it and seeing how much more educated they were than the other students, how much they had read that other students hadn't read, and how they were able to write a paper because they had logic and rhetoric and just knew how to think.
Yeah.
And how they could argue, how they weren't really ever threatened by, you go to college and you've got really some professors, you've got some crazy ideas, but they never really strayed from what they believed because they were educated and firm in that, confident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this has been really fun remembering with you, and I think hopefully inspiring for people. Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome. It's always nice to spend time with you, Shane.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Classical Etc. If you want to show support for the video, then you can hit the thumbs up icon below to give it a like. Or if you want to leave a comment, you can tell me what conversations you'd like me to have in the future. Check out our Memoria Press YouTube channel to find tons of other educational resources. And also a huge thank you to the Memoria Press Podcast Network. This is Classical Etc., and I'll see you next time.